Hi, YouTube. With all the things that have been happening with ISIS, Syria, and whatnot, and other things in the Middle East, I wanted to make sure I shared this cable with you. I would have shared it years ago when I first found it on WikiLeaks. However, I wasn't very good at doing videos, and I still am not very good at doing videos, but I know that it's important to share it, and I've tried to describe it to people verbally, but most people just don't get it. So I'm going to paste the link below in the description field, but I'm also going to read it. So for those of you that can handle sometimes me not pronouncing things correctly or saying people's names also incorrectly, and you can bear with somebody reading this for you, I'm more than happy to do it because I think it's very important that people add this information to their thought process on the things that are happening in the Middle East. I found this back when the AP reporter's issue with the Apache helicopter was released originally from WikiLeaks, so it was many years ago, and anybody who knows what Wesley Clark said in 2007, they'll understand how this also can correlate. Also, could you please comment if you know who the Al-Qaeda leader was back in 2006, because they say that that leader was killed, and I'm curious, who was it then? I thought at that time it was still considered Osama bin Laden, but I could be mistaken as it's been several years since then. Anyhow, again, I will paste the link below and you can click it. I want to share this because this is something that, like I said, I read years ago and I think it's important to put in our thought process, and I'm sorry I didn't share it sooner. Anyhow, without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and read, so forgive my periodic swallowing and periodic taking of breaths, but I'll try to read this as quickly as possible for you. The SARG, by the way, is the Syrian, and I'm not sure what the A is for, but it's Syrian Republic Government. The SARG ends in 2006 in a much stronger position domestically and internationally than it did in 2005. While there may be additional bilateral or multilateral pressure that can impact Syria, the regime is based on a small clique that is largely immune to such pressure. However, Bashar Assad's growing self-confidence and reliance on this small clique could lead him to make mistakes and ill-judged policy decisions through trademark emotional reactions to challenges, providing us with new opportunities. For example, Bashar's reaction to the prospect of the Hariri Tribunal and to publicity for Qaddam and the National Salvation Front borders on the irrational. Additionally, Bashar's reported preoccupation with his image and how he is perceived internationally is a potential liability in his decision-making process. We believe Bashar's weaknesses are in how he chooses to react to looming issues, both perceived and real, such as the conflict between economic reform steps, however limited, and entrenched corrupt forces, the Kurdish question, and the potential threat to the regime from the increasing presence of transiting Islamist extremists. This cable summarizes our assessment of these vulnerabilities and suggests that there may be actions, statements, and signals that the USG can send that will improve the likelihood of such opportunities arising. These proposals will need to be fleshed out and converted into real actions, and we need to be ready to move quickly to take advantage of such opportunities. Many of our suggestions underlining using public diplomacy and more indirect means to send messages that influence the inner circle. So as you can see through just that alone, they want to find his weak spots and use his weak spots that they already know and be ready to go after him as soon as possible and to put the pressure on. As the end of 2006 approaches, Bashar appears in some ways stronger than he has in 2 years. The country is economically stable, at least for the short term. Internal opposition the regime faces is weak and intimidated, and regional issues seem to be going Syria's way from Damascus' perspective. Nonetheless, there are some long-standing vulnerabilities and looming issues that may provide opportunities to up the pressure on Bashar and his inner circle. Regime decision-making is limited to Bashar and an inner circle that often produces poorly thought out tactical decisions and sometimes emotional approaches, such as Bashar's universally derided August 15th speech. Some of these vulnerabilities, such as the regime's near irrational views on Lebanon, can be exploited to put pressure on the regime. Actions that cause Bashar to lose balance and increase his insecurity are in our interest because his inexperience and his regime's extremely small decision making circle make him prone to diplomatic stumbles that can weaken him domestically and regionally. While the consequences of his mistakes are hard to predict and the benefits may vary, if we are prepared to move quickly to take advantage of the opportunities that may open up, we may directly impact regime behavior where it matters, Bashar and his inner circle. The following provides our summary of potential vulnerabilities and possible means to exploit them. Vulnerability: the Hariri investigation and tribunal. The Hariri investigation and the prospect of a Lebanon tribunal has provoked powerful SARG reactions, primarily because of the embarrassment the investigation causes. Rationally, the regime should calculate that it can deal with any summons of Syrian officials by refusing to turn over any suspects, or in extreme cases, by engineering suicides. But it seems the real issue for Bashar is that Syria's dignity and its international reputation are put into question. Fiercely held sentiments that Syria should continue to exercise dominant control in Lebanon play into these sensitivities. We should seek to exploit this raw nerve without waiting for formation of the tribunal. Thought that engineering suicides was quite telling. Possible action: publicity highlighting the consequences of the ongoing investigation. A, a La Mehlis causes Bashar personal angst and may lead him to act irrationally. The regime has deep-seated fears about the international scrutiny that a tribunal or Brahmert's accusations, even against lower echelon figures, would prompt. The Mali's accusations of October 2005 caused the most serious strains in Bashar's inner circle. While the family got back together, these splits may lie just below the surface. Vulnerability: the alliance with Tehran. Bashar is walking a fine line in his increasingly strong relations with Iran, seeking necessary support while not completely alienating Syria's moderate Sunni Arab neighbors by being perceived as aiding Persian fundamentalist Shiite interests. Bashar's decision to not attend the Talabani Ahmadinejad, oh, I'm sorry I say that wrong every time, but Ahmadinejad summit in Tehran. Sorry I slaughtered that, as horrible. Following FM Molam's trip to Iraq can be seen as a manifestation of Bashar's sensitivity to the Arab optic on his Iranian alliance. Possible action: play on Sunni fears of Iranian influence. There are fears in Syria that the Iranians are active in both Shiite proselytizing and conversion of mostly poor Sunnis. Though often exaggerated, such fears reflect an element of the Sunni community in Syria that is increasingly upset by and focused on the spread of Iranian influence in their country through activities ranging from mosque construction to business. Both the local Egyptian and Saudi missions here, as well as prominent Syrian Sunni religious leaders, are giving increasing attention to the matter, and we should coordinate more closely with their governments on ways to better publicize and focus regional attention on the issue. Vulnerability: the inner circle at the end of the day. The regime is dominated by the Assad family and to a lesser degree by the Bashar Assad's maternal family, the Mughals. With many family members believed to be increasingly corrupt, the family and hangers-on, as well as the larger Alawite sect, are not immune to feuds and anti-regime conspiracies, as was evident last year when intimates of various regime pillars, including the Mughals, approached us about post-Bashar possibilities. So it seems like his own family was approaching them based on if Bashar was ousted. Corruption is a great divider, and Bashar's inner circle is subject to the usual feuds and squabbles related to graft and corruption. For example, it is generally known that Maher Assad is particularly corrupt and incorrigible. He has no scruples in his feuds with his family members or others. There is also tremendous fear in the Alawite community about retribution if the Sunni majority ever regains power. The possible action is additional designations. Targeting sanctions against the regime members and their intimates are generally welcomed by most elements of Syrian society, but the way designations are applied must must exploit fissures and render the inner circle weaker rather than drive its members closer together. The designation of Shawkat caused him some personal irritation and was the subject of considerable discussion in the business community here. While the public reaction to corruption tends to be muted, continued reminders of corruption in the inner circle have resonance. We should look for ways to remind the public of our previous designations. Vulnerability, the Qaddam factor. Qaddam knows where the regime's skeletons are hidden, which provokes enormous irritation from Bashar, vastly disproportionate to any support Qaddam has within Syria. Bashar Assad's personally and his regime in general follow every news item involving Qaddam with tremendous emotional interest. The regime reacts with self-defeating anger whenever another Arab hosts Qaddam or allows him to make public statement through any of its media outlets. Possible action. We should continue to encourage the Saudis and others to allow Qaddam access to their media outlets, providing him with venues for airing the SARC's dirty laundry. We should anticipate an overreaction by the regime that will add to its isolation and alienation from its Arab neighbors. Vulnerability, divisions in the military security services. Bashar constantly guards against challenges from those with ties inside the military and security services. He is also nervous about any loyalty senior officers or former senior officers feel towards disaffected former regime elements like Rifat Assad and Qaddam. The inner circle focuses continuously on who will get what piece of the corruption action. Some moves by Bashar is narrowing the circle of those who benefit from high-level graft and has increased with those with ties to the security services who have access to grind. Possible action. Encourage rumors and signals of external plotting. The regime is intensely sensitive to rumors about coup plotting and relentlessness in the security services and military. Regional allies like Egypt and Saudi Arabia should be encouraged to meet with figures like Qaddam and Rifat Assad as ways of sending such signals, with appropriate leaking of meetings afterwards. This again touches on this insular regime's paranoia, and it increases the possibility of a self-defeating overreaction. Vulnerability, reform forces versus Ba'athist, other corrupt elites. Bashar keeps unveiling a steady stream of initiatives on economic reform, and it is certainly possible he believes this issue is his legacy to Syria. While limited and ineffectual, these steps have brought back Syrian expats to invest and have created at least the illusion of increasing openness. Finding ways to publicly call into question Bashar's reform efforts, pointing for example to the use of reform to disguise cronyism, would embarrass Bashar and undercut these efforts to shore up his legitimacy. Revealing Assad family inner circle corruption would have a similar effect. Possible actions. Highlighting failures of reform, especially in the run-up to the 2007 presidential elections, is a move that Bashar would find highly embarrassing and delegitimizing. Comparing and contrasting puny Syrian reform efforts with the rest of the Middle East would also embarrass and irritate Bashar. Vulnerability, the economy. Perpetually underperforming, the Syrian economy creates jobs for less than 50% of the country's university graduates. Oil accounts for 70% of exports and 30% of government revenue, but production is in steady decline. By 2010, Syria is expected to become a net importer of oil. Few experts believe the SARG is capable of managing successfully the expected economic dislocations. Discourage the FDI, especially from the Gulf. Syria has enjoyed a considerable uptick in foreign direct investment of FDI in the last 2 years that appears to be picking up steam. The most important new foreign direct investment is undoubtedly from the Gulf. Vulnerability. The Kurds, the most organized and daring political opposition and civil society groups, are among the ethnic minority Kurds, concentrated in Syria's northeast, as well as in communities in Damascus and Aleppo. This group has been willing to protest violently in its home territory when others would dare not. There are few threats that loom larger in Bashar's mind than unrest with the Kurds, and what is a rare occurrence, our DAT was convoked by Syrian military intelligence in May of 2006 to protest what the Syrians believed were U.S. efforts to provide military training and equipment to the Kurds in Syria. Read that again. Our DAT was convoked by Syrian military intelligence in May of 2006 to protest what the Syrians believed were U.S. efforts to provide military training and equipment to the Kurds in Syria. Possible action: highlighting Kurdish complaints and public statements, including publicizing human rights abuses, will exacerbate regime's concerns about the Kurdish population. Focus on economic hardship in Kurdish areas and the SARG's long-standing refusal to offer citizenship to some 200,000 stateless Kurds. This issue would need to be handled carefully, since giving the wrong kind of prominence to Kurdish issues in Syria could be a liability for our efforts at uniting the opposition, given Syrian, mostly Arab civil society skepticism of the Kurdish objectives. Vulnerability: extremist elements increasingly use Syria as a base, while the SARG has taken some actions against groups stating links to al-Qaeda. With the killing of the al-Qaeda leader on the border with Lebanon in early December, and the increasing terrorist attacks inside Syria, culminating in the September 12 attacks at the U.S. Embassy. The SARG's policies in Iraq and support for terrorists elsewhere as well can be seen to be coming home to roost. Possible actions: publicize presence of transiting or externally focused extremist groups in Syria, not limited to mention of Hamas and PIJ. Publicize Syrian efforts against extremist groups in a way that suggests weakness, signs of instability, and uncontrolled blowback. The SARG's argument, usually used after terror attacks in Syria, that it too is a victim of terrorism, should be used against it to give greater prominence to increasing signs of instability within Syria. Conclusion: this analysis leaves out the anti-regime Syrian Islamists because it is difficult to get an accurate picture of the threat within Syria that such groups pose. They are certainly a long-term threat, while it alludes to the vulnerabilities that Syria faces because of its alliance with Iran. It does not elaborate fully on this topic. The bottom line is that Bashar is entering the new year in a stronger position than he has been in several years, but those strengths also carry with them, or sometimes mask, vulnerabilities. If we are ready to capitalize, they will offer us opportunity to disrupt his decision making, keeping him off balance, and make him pay a premium for his mistakes. So there you go. You can clearly tell that there was plans in place. They were uh, figuring out all of his weakness, ways to mess with his mind, ways to use his enemies against him. Um, there was even concern that he has actually done better and things have gotten better from the Damascus perspective. And his family, they even talk about using his family to take advantage of the situation because they are corrupt enough to use against Bashar. And again, the thing about the Al Qaeda leader was killed, and then the embassy was attacked. And so, again, like I said, if you could post who was the Al Qaeda leader in 2006, I had thought that it was still considered Osama bin Laden, or at least that's what we were being led to believe. So, anyways, I hope that this proved helpful to add to your information. And again, the link is in the description field. Please save it, and if you can, print this up so that it's forever held should this ever be brought down. But it has been faithfully up for several years. But again, one can never tell what will happen in the future. So, anyways, thank you, YouTube, and thank you for being patient with my reading of this and my bad pronunciation and whatnot. You all have a great day. Bye.